Oh, oh God. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Gabesty here. This is the normal raid guide for Siegecrafter Blackfuse in Siege of Orgrimmar. And if you want the quick guide, or you can check out any of the role guides, just click on the annotations on screen. Now, your raid composition will require 2 tanks for sure, and 2 to 3 healers, pretty standard there. Now, at the time of this recording, I cannot confirm whether this fight has a berserk timer, a hard berserk timer. For that reason, it's difficult to say if the DPS requirement is severe or not. That said, we found that this fight was mostly about execution, and rather than like just a burn sort of, burst the boss down sort of period. So if you're learning this, I would recommend 3 healers for that reason. Just stabilize things, and then if you happen to hit a berserk timer of some sort, well, then you'll know that you can up your DPS or tone down your healing or whatnot. But in the video here, we are very overgeared, so we're just using 2 healers, and it's not that much of a problem. So the primary mechanic or gimmick for this fight is the assembly line and the weapons that are formed. So unfortunately, I don't have direct footage of the assembly line, but you can almost always see it in the background of the screen in the top there. It's got the lasers of fire, and you can see the assembly line moving. So essentially, throughout the fight, 3 weapon parts will appear every 30 seconds on that assembly line. And once they appear, they'll slowly move along it. And any players that wish to can jump into the pipe along the edge there. You can use any of those pipes there, kind of by the blue marker. As long as they don't have smoke in them, you can jump in them. And this will transport you onto the front of the assembly line, at which point you can kill the weapon parts. Now, when you kill a single weapon part, the other 2 will have a protective shield that prevents them from taking damage. So for each set of weapon parts, you can only actually destroy 1 of them. They have fairly low health. So typically, we would send 2 DPS to handle this. Now, 1 strong DPS could handle it by themselves, but 2 is the safer route. So there you can see in the background, we got a couple players up on there killing these parts, and they're focusing on a particular one so that we can choose which weapon parts make it through and which do not, which is kind of the overall goal if you want to control things a little better. So, but that said, that's the main gimmick. Every 30 seconds, new weapon parts will come out, and a couple DPS players go on to the assembly line, dodging the flames, running against the actual pole of the line itself, and killing the weapon part that they want to. Once they reach the end, there are a couple pipes near the end on the right side that they can drop into. And our raid members sometimes found it was difficult to always make it into the pipes. You could easily fall between them and miss, but the best thing seemed to be to not actually jump. Instead, you just stand along the edge and you run into one rather than trying to jump into it and time it well. It will sort of pick up that you're close by and suck you in. I should also briefly mention that players that use the pipes to go on the assembly line will get a minute-long debuff called pattern recognition, which prevents them from using the pipes again until that debuff is gone. Because this is a minute debuff and the assembly parts come out every 30 seconds, it means that you need to rotate at least 2 groups of players to handle the weapon parts. So we just used a rotation of 4 DPS players, 2 in each group, and they just went back and forth. Some sort of indicator about when the next assembly is spawning, or just when you are losing your pattern recognition debuff is pretty helpful. Because basically when your debuff runs out, the next assembly line that you're assigned to go to is pretty much going to occur almost right away. So, once you've killed one of the weapon parts, the other 2, as I said, are shielded, and they will continue through the conveyor belt to the end. Once they reach the end, eventually they will form into constructed weapons, which will appear on the belt on the other side of the room. So you can kind of see the belt in the back there. That's the non-assembly line part where they're actually formed up already. So when a weapon is formed here, it will engage the raid in some manner. There are 4 different weapon types, so we'll just briefly go through them and what they do. First, you have the laser turret, which will just create a superheated beam that chases a random player. There you can see it there. And it's chasing, I can't tell who that is. Paladin, maybe? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Anyway, the player just runs the beam away so that it doesn't hit other players, and then try not to stand in the fire. Pretty obvious. Another weapon type is the shockwave missile turret, which will shoot a missile, usually near the tank location of the boss, and it will explode in waves that you saw crossing the screen there. This is similar to the sort of the waves from Heroic Ragnaros, if you've done that fight. But basically, they have a very long animation time, so you can wait quite a long time before the wave in front of you goes off. And once it goes off, the spikes come up, and you simply wait for it to pass, and you run through it. So here you can see I'm standing on the edge, waiting for that wave to trigger, and then now it's triggered, so I go in, and now I'm safe. The next one goes out from me, and so on. So everyone in your raid pretty much just needs to watch for that and dodge it accordingly. The next weapon type is the electromagnet, which is going off right now. It's that blue sort of wave. It just ended, actually. When this appears, this will suck everyone toward it, including a lot of the projectiles that are on the ground. And these are the shredder blades thrown by the boss, which we'll talk about in a moment. But essentially, this pulls those blades across the room toward the magnet, getting rid of them. But when the blades cross over players during this suction phase, they also will do damage to the player. So if that magnet is coming down, just make sure you're not in line with a ton of blades, or it could be dangerous. And then the final weapon is the crawler mines. And we found these to be the most annoying because they just require the most focus and lost DPS from the boss, essentially. But the mines will basically spawn in the back of the room by the weapon area, and they'll fixate on a random raid member. If they reach melee range with that member, they'll self-destruct and deal pretty heavy damage to the entire raid. However, they can be stunned and snared and rooted and all that stuff for the first minute of their lifespan. So the best thing to do, we found, is when they spawn, have your range stun them and then just DPS them down unless they're being chased and therefore they need to run away from one. But that's pretty much it. The crawler mines take precedence because everything else doesn't actually have an attackable ad to deal with. So let's talk about Siegecrafter and Shredder management, which is pretty much the domain of your tanks exclusively. The good news is that the tanks actually have quite a bit of active stuff to do on this fight, so it's an important role to get right. The basic idea here is that one tank will be on Siegecrafter at any given time, and one tank will be handling the Shredder. Now, generally speaking, the Shredder should be tanked 35 yards away from the boss, because if he's within 35 yards, the boss will use a repair beam that heals them for 5% every 3 seconds. So there you can see the beam going off there. So it's important that you maintain a proper distance between those two targets. Now that said, killing the Shredder is almost exclusively handled by the tank that's on them at the time. The reason for this is that the Shredders have reactive armor, which reduces damage taken by 80%. However, these guys can be damaged by tanks that have electrostatic charge. Electrostatic charge is cast by Blackfuse on its current target, and this stacks up. So it does pretty heavy damage, and this damage increases 100% each time it's cast. But it also applies a stack that increases damage dealt to the Shredder by 200% per stack. So at 3 or 4 stacks, which is a reasonable amount for tank swaps to occur, the tank is going to do 600 to 800% extra damage to that Shredder. In addition to that, the Shredder will take damage from the environmental effects that are around the room. So these include the saw blades thrown by the boss, the fire from the laser beams, the missile waves, detonate from mines, all that good stuff. For the most part, however, the main things that will kill the Shredder are the tank's actual direct damage, and then either the serrated blades or the superheated fire patches. The mines and the shockwave missiles are just too much hassle and not enough damage to really worry about. Now, because the superheated stacks up, it will technically do the most DPS given enough time, but because of movement requirements, it's kind of the most difficult to maintain. So we found that the best thing to do was to use the blades to help kill the shredder. So if there are blades active, the tank will move them into one or more blades while not standing in the blade himself, and that blade will do a lot of extra damage. The automated shredders will also use death from above fairly frequently, which basically causes them to leap into the air and upon landing do heavy damage to anyone within 15 yards. However, after they land, they're stunned for 5 seconds and will take 200% extra damage. So this is another reason that using the blades is a good idea, because they will land back on the blade and immediately take that extra damage, whereas often the fire will not continue to stack while they're in the air. So they only can restack it once they get back on the ground. So the last thing to be aware of for the shredders is that killing them quickly is really important. And because this is almost exclusively a tank duty, it's really important that your tanks do this in a quick manner. So they have to immediately get the shredder taking heavy damage, get them into the blades or the fire, whatever it is, because the shredder will frequently use overload. And this is an ability that hits the entire raid, if you're not on the conveyor belt, that is. And it will deal 200,000 damage initially on the first cast, but this increases by 30% each time it's cast. And this can go up to 20 stacks. So this will very quickly become the most dangerous ability in terms of raid damage that the raid will face. So it's really, really important that your tanks handle the shredders quickly and kill them off as quick as you can. Now, technically, you can ask for extra DPS from non-tank members, but remember that they will only do 20% of their normal DPS. So it effectively takes your entire DPS team to do the damage of one normal DPS player, which is generally speaking not worth the lost damage on Siegebreaker himself. So for the most part, it's always up to your tanks to handle those shredders quickly. So let's talk about overall strategy. As I mentioned at the start, this fight is really all about execution. There aren't any periods where you're just burning the boss down or ignoring other mechanics just to finish him off. For the most part, the fight begins and progresses and ends in the same basic way. The mechanics are always the same, handling them is always the same. So it's really just a matter of pushing through and being stable throughout the fight. So the final mechanic that I didn't mention yet that's worth noting is that if the assembly line players do not kill at least one weapon part, or I should say one weapon part, since you can only kill one per phase, the boss will gain a temporary shield that reduces the damage he takes by 90%, and this lasts 20 seconds. So if there is a Berserk timer, that's probably a good way to hit it, by letting weapon parts go through frequently, and therefore having the boss become almost immune to damage for quite a while. So the best thing you can do is figure out basic patterns and positions that you can repeat over and over. So as I said, we have two groups of 2 players, each rotating through the assembly line to handle those. Our general strategy was to focus on the crawler mines first, if that weapon part was active, because we didn't want to deal with those. And then second from that was the magnetic crush or the missile. Missile is actually pretty easy to dodge, so I would focus on magnetic crush second if given the chance. This also will allow you to keep the saw blades active more frequently for your shredder killing. So the laser turrets are pretty easy to avoid, and the missiles are pretty easy to avoid. So anyway, focus on the weapon parts that you want to eliminate so that they don't form up on the other side as a formed weapon, essentially. Other than that, just focus the boss whenever you can. Make sure your tanks handle shredders and swaps properly, keeping them away from the boss so he doesn't heal them, and you should eventually push through the fight. That is Siegecrafter Blackfuse Normal Raid Guide. As always, good luck, and thanks for watching.